thank you
Yes,
for that.
that's good. It's interesting as well. It's a very very rare occurrence, but the many Christians fast during Lent, and for the first time I can remember, Lent and Ramadan started on the same day. So it's yeah, there's definitely some sort of alignment there happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I know that you said that you do a lot. I think you do a course to Muslims about Christianity as well. I think you were saying that as well. So,
Yes,
and you said,
yeah. So I've had the real privilege of for well, I've been working in as a mental health chaplain for the past 20 years, specializing in forensic mental health, which is the crude way to describe it is secure prison conditions that are for people that have mental health problems. So when you see that somebody's had a hospital order rather than go to prison, that's been my speciality, working in high security, medium and low secure units, but also working alongside lots of other different mental health settings in a multi-faith team. So for the past 20 years, I've worked closely with all faiths, but particularly with our imams, and as a lead to the service, I've always enjoyed the conversation and the friendship of imams, and I've toured Leicester many times, been to many mosques, and I think the record was 6 meals in one day whilst whilst travelling around a festival in Leicester with one of our imams. Very hospitable experience. But yes, so through that work as a mental health chaplain, I've had the privilege of working with some Muslim institutions, uh, uh, providing sessions on mental health awareness or the issues of being a spiritual caregiver, a chaplain in mental health settings, but also teaching on a course for Muslims that were going to be RE teachers, so Islamic studies um, with education, having to study a second religion to be an RE teacher in mainstream school meant that I had the privilege and the experience of delivering the course on the history and theology of Christianity. So yes, it's a very all of this. It's a very eye-opening experience to understand in depth and intimately what uh, the points of agreement are and the points of difference are across all faiths. You know, there are some misconceptions about what faiths do and don't agree on, and I think that that's an interesting conversation. But yeah, we you know there should be agreement and the ability to be able to respect and to walk together in particularly in the work that we're doing in the mental health setting.
because you're like the lead or the head chaplain, you have a lot of chaplains under you. So how many roughly do you have under you?
It's about 20.
Yeah.
And that so the way that it works in the mental health setting is that we are a needs-led service, which means we don't proselytize, which means try to convert anybody. Nobody's allowed to do that. We provide spiritual and pastoral religious care for the patients that exist and as they require it. So, for example, in my 20 years working in the NHS, I've never had a request for a Zoroastrian chaplain. So we don't have a Zoroastrian that comes in trying to, to find somebody or to convert somebody. We only work according to needs. So yeah, it's very very interesting. So we as you can imagine, there's a lot of Christian requests and access for all the different Christian traditions: Roman Catholic, Anglican, which is Church of England, the Free Church expressions, Methodist, Baptist, Pentecostal, but also lots of Muslim patients that require support, require Juma prayers on Friday, and also we would have Buddhists, pagan chaplains, lots of different religious representatives that come in to meet the needs of people, which can be interesting. I think most of us that, as a believer of any kind, but particularly as a faith leader, you probably have very superficial engagement with leaders and people of other faiths. But in the setting that we're in, we really work closely together, and so it requires a real understanding. If you're really going to work with respect and with trust, and then it requires a real understanding of each other, to be able to do that. And I think we've achieved that in our team. It's a very harmonious, friendly, generous team that works together. I think one of the things that is, how have we achieved that? One of the things that we do is we recognize that we believe different things, and that's okay. We don't. There was a, particularly back in the probably 80s and 90s, there was a movement called the interfaith movement. And the interfaith movement tried to harmonize faith. And when you go to some of the events, interfaith events, they would try and have spiritual practices of some kind, perhaps prayers or a meditation, or something of that sort. And one of the problems with that is you are trying to harmonize something that can't be harmonized. So, for example, if it was a Roman Catholic that was leading that, then the Buddhists, the Muslims present, might feel uncomfortable about what was being led or said, and similarly, across all the faiths, whoever was leading. So the interfaith movement, I think, perhaps tried to harmonize more, whereas multi-faith working is the idea of recognizing differences, but working shoulder to shoulder, and making sure that we support each other in the work that we're doing. So yeah, it's a very good, very positive environment to be in my experience.
I think that's great. I remember when we spoke briefly, you were telling me that you don't try to convert each other. If you were trying to do that, then the conversations would be long-winded, they would never end. And
Mm, mm,
what you try to do is you try to work together harmoniously. You all know you're focusing on your own strengths and your own religions. And if people come
mm,
to you and if people are referred to you, you will designate the right person according to whichever religion. And I thought that's a really positive approach because when I was a patient a long time ago, when I was a patient, I didn't realize like how coordinated things were, especially with the chaplaincy service. So I was just
mm,
now on the other side as a staff member. I really appreciate that. You're all harmonious and you're respecting each other's values and the religions that you have. So it's really
mm.
great to hear because I don't think people hear enough about chaplaincy work, and then to hear from you especially
Yeah.
is great as well because you are the lead chaplain. So it's great to hear that.
Yes, and it is good. I mean, not to say that it's perfect. So some faiths lend themselves to multi-faith working by the nature of the what's integral to that faith. For example, if you're Hindu, there's a much wider acceptance naturally of other belief systems. Just as one example. Um, but then there are other faiths, certain parts of Christianity, but perhaps Islam may be the same, um, that are have a little bit more of an exclusive content to the belief system, where your belief is that this is the way to do it, and that's perfectly okay to completely believe that you've got the truth and everybody else is wrong. To put it really bluntly, it's perfectly fine to think that. It's how you express it in the setting that you're in mental health, for example. We can't, as chaplains, we don't seem to be arguing about who's got the truth. That's not to say that we don't haven't at times had problems with that. Some of the really there are some elements of Christianity that are really exclusive, There's one group that sometimes they donate Bibles to us, but as a Christian group, they won't even come and shake the hands of a chaplain when they're handing over those Bibles, because they don't believe that Christianity, that any Christianity apart from theirs, is a true form of Christianity. So, they don't really engage inside the hospital, although they may send information for patients of that particular faith. So it's my view is it's okay to believe that I'm completely wrong. I always say this to the students when if I'm talking about Christianity to a group of Muslim students, I say I'm not going to try and convert you. I'm not going to critique your faith. But you can. I'm standing at the front to teach, so you can say whatever you want to me. You can ask anything. I'm completely unoffendable. You ought to think that I'm wrong about some things. If you are being true to your own faith, you ought to think that I'm wrong about some things, and that's okay. And I think sometimes in the modern world, there's one of the old words within equality, diversity, and inclusion was tolerance. We talk about having tolerance, but that word has almost completely vanished, and now it's moved from tolerance, and this is just my personal view, to acceptance. And so therefore, at one time you could look and say to somebody, okay, well, I don't believe the same as you, I don't think the same as you, but I can be absolutely tolerant towards you and respectful. And whereas nowadays there's a little bit more pressure to be seen to be accepting of other, not just other religions, but other lifestyles and things that may conflict with your own faith. And one of my roles as a chaplain has very often been when, for example, a patient may be accused of homophobia or it can be various things. And so sometimes I'll talk to the teams and speak, perhaps speak with that patient and say, it's not that, this patient's trying to really work out their faith, talks about, as a very clear teaching on sexual identity and gender and so on. So they're not on their own a homophobic person. They're trying to work out how to be in this setting where everybody's thrust together. They in on a ward where you've got all different lifestyles and all different beliefs, and so part of our role has been very often trying to mediate that, but also saying to the patient, you can hold your beliefs, but it's how you express them. If we've got to live together, whether you're on a ward, whether you're on a housing estate and in a community, or whether you're in public life. We've got to find a way to be. I believe that there is a way to be respectful of each other while also acknowledging difference.
So when it comes to hiring someone to be a chaplain, um, how do you do that? I would assume, the criteria would be someone who's a bit open-minded, maybe. Um, what would
Yes, yeah. I mean, I was thinking what might be interesting is to talk about what the term chaplain means, because um, I think most people associate it with chapel, and there is a distant connection there. So to be a Muslim chaplain sounds like a contradiction in terms, um, because, well, chaplain, that's surely a Christian term. But where it actually comes from, the term chaplain, is there was a soldier who then became a priest called Martin. Eventually, he was canonized, I think, by the Catholic Church. They called him Saint Martin. But before all of that, there's a story about him coming out of a city, and he was on his horse, and he got a long cloak that ran down over him and over the horse, and there was a man who'd be. For whatever reason, he wanted to enter the city, but he'd lost his clothes and he was naked, and he asked Martin for his cloak, and Martin said to him, "Well, if I give you my cloak, I will then be freezing." So what he did, he took his sword and he cut the cloak in two so that he'd got a part of the cloak. The man had cloak to wrap around himself and was able to enter the city. And the French for cloak is chapelle. And so chaplain comes from that term, cloak. And the idea is that you work as a chaplain, as a faith leader, um, that is working in an institution that's not necessarily religious. So that can be hospital, it can be prison, it could be within the police force or the ambulance service, or it could be within education, or it could be in community, it could be in retail. These are all the areas where chaplains operate. You are somebody who goes in with your own covering of or your own faith perspective, but you're going there to give some of that to somebody else, to help somebody else.
That's such
And
a
so
nice
that's
background story about that. That's a really nice.
yeah, it's and so it's not a contradiction in terms to be a Buddhist chaplain or a Muslim chaplain, because you're not associating yourself with the church. You're associating yourself with the action, with the the service of providing covering for people who are in a situation where it's not so. When as a chaplain you work within an organisation or an institution, people who wouldn't normally have access to and often wouldn't have access to faith leaders or religious support can access that. I mean, one of the things about being a chaplain, and I will come to to how we do recruit. I'm heading there slowly. um,
I did get a message for you. That's why I was just checking my phone.
ah,
I got to send him my regards, please. He knew me as Bill, and I know him. He's a nice man, and he wished us luck for the show today. So
oh, very good.
I just thought I'd give him a shout out because he did say
Oh, that's wonderful. Hi, Bill.
yeah.
Bless you. Um, but and so and so one of the things that requirements of being a chaplain is that whilst you come in as under your faith umbrella, so if you come in as an imam, yes, you come in to be the support for Muslim patients, service users, carers, and also the staff as well. So there may be overt things such as leading Friday prayers or advising on Ramadan, or organizing Eid celebration, or sometimes in the forensic setting, you may be working with teams that have got somebody who's struggling with a religious idea that's all bound up in mental health problems. You may find, as an imam, you may find yourself being asked to advise regarding somebody's language or somebody's beliefs in relation to, like I said, sometimes work in high security mental health. So sometimes you can find yourself advising people that are in the Home Office or counter-terrorism, supporting, always with a patient focus, but also there is a security and a risk element to that you're working with. So it's true when it comes to recruitment that it's not for everybody. I've had lots of Christian chaplains who have come in and they've probably had a miserable year of being a chaplain, and then have left to go back to parish work or to go to a teaching role because they don't enjoy the fact that there's lots of reasons why people don't enjoy it. I mean, one of the reasons could be that for example, if you're a Church of England priest, you're used to people coming to you wanting baptism, wanting marriage, wanting funerals, coming to ask you to go to the local school and give a talk, or whatever it may be. Whereas when you work as a chaplain, you very much carve out your own space, and it requires a particular confidence just to be going on towards where you're sitting down, you're talking to everybody, you're talking about you may have a 2-year conversation with a patient about football. That's what they want to talk to you about, and then at the end of that 2 years they may then ask you a question. They may have a bereavement in their family, they may have something, and you may find yourself as part of that journey, then it becomes develops a really strong spiritual element. So when we do recruit, and this is one of the things that I want to make very clear to anybody thinking about chaplaincy, is that when you step into an organization, you're not just operating according to the religious rules that and the teachings and the principles and the scriptural principles of your faith, but you've now stepped into an organization and you are bound by equality law. You're bound by all of that legislation, that some elements of it you may not agree with. You may not. It may conflict with you with your faith. So it may be that you could be leading a service and find that you've got 3 transgender patients that come to those prayers or come to that service, and what you can't do, you can't then start saying, well, this is clearly wrong. This is what that my religious text says about that, because you're also bound. You're working within the organisation. I mean, if you speak to any of our chaplains, every one of them say that they've found themselves in a situation sometimes where they feel a bit of conflict about something, and you have to work through that. You have to find a way forward for yourself, and that's why I say some people come in and decide that it's not for them, not just for that reason, but lots of reasons why they don't enjoy working in that environment. But so yeah, you've got to reconcile yourself to the fact that you've got to make that journey. What is very good, I would say, about most settings is they then don't demand that you would validate something that is clearly in conflict with your faith, because that's the other side of it. Just as the different rights and the different strands of protection exist, so you are entitled to hold your own faith and hold your own faith perspective, which may conflict with other things, and it's okay, as long as what you're not doing is you're not abusing or speaking out against somebody's particular lifestyle. You can have those conversations sometimes in private with somebody, and very often people will ask to see you because they're wrestling with their identity, or they're wrestling with their situation. But it's
as a chaplain, you have to be very welcoming, very approachable, and
mm,
very open-minded. And I can imagine
very much.
I can imagine the interview process. You might not be able to
Mm,
fully get that out of someone, so you might have to
no,
test them a bit. Put them in the deep water, and then see
yeah.
if they're okay with the
Well,
role.
one of the problems with and it's a good thing and it's a bad thing, and that's one of the things about life, isn't it? That I think we like to, when you're younger, you think very black and white, right and wrong, but I think what's important to recognise that there are good things and bad things about all processes and all things. So, for example, with that interview process nowadays, when you get an application, there's no name on it. You're just looking at the person, which is very good, because I know, for example, it's well documented that if you've got in this country, it's been demonstrated time and again that if you've got a non-English sounding name, you're less likely to go to the next stage of an interview sometimes in certain settings, and so it's good that happens. So then you're looking at the person rather than it reduces because we all have biases, we all have our own prejudices within us, but then when it comes to interview, so the way that questions are made up is you have your range of questions, and each one can score either 1 point, 2 point, or 3 points, depending on how well they answered that question and what you were looking for. You decide what you were looking for beforehand. So the person at the end of the day that gets the job is the one with the highest points. And the problem with that is that sometimes some people are very good at interviews and some people are terrible at interviews. So, I've been in situations where I know who's getting the job, but I know who should have got the job. And that can be a little bit frustrating at times.
You know,
But
in NHS sometimes it's understaffed and things like that. So how do you cope with when when you have a man down, and obviously you have chaplains in different fields. So if, like, for instance, the Muslim imam is not present, and he might be having some sort of emergency situation, so he can't be present and he can't help out, maybe let's say a month or two, then how do you deal with that as the lead chaplain?
it all falls to me. It all falls to me in the end, because that, part of my responsibility, along with we have a service manager as well. So I don't have, I have kind of operational responsibility, whereas with the service manager, he tends to deal with the overall strategy for the service and also like HR type and training type issues. So, as part of the NHS, we're not immune from these problems. In fact, at the moment, we have chaplains that work on what is called a substantive contract, meaning they're employed by the NHS. They may be anything from 2 days a week to 5 days a week. And but then we also have bank chaplains that operate on the same system as nursing, bank nursing, where and that very often suits faith leaders because they may have their own temple, their own church, their own mosque, and so to give 7 hours a week flexibly on a bank contract really works. But at the moment, across the NHS, they're trying to reduce the bank staff, and so if we lose a bank member of staff, those hours aren't replaced, which means at the moment I've got two places, three actually, where I'm now going in there as the chaplain because the bank staff left, and now I have to provide that cover. I mean, what I would say is one of the other things about being a chaplain is that because sometimes I think there's a bit of a myth that you're expected to be a multi-faith person, and whilst as an imam going in, if somebody says to you, "Can I just have a talk to you? I've had a stressful morning," you can. Yeah, that's one thing. If they said to you, "But I'm also a Catholic," will you say this Catholic prayer for me? Nobody's going to expect the imam to do that. That wouldn't be reasonable to do that. So sometimes your work is referring somebody else on. But what I do find myself, in fact, just yesterday I was at a unit where there was a patient who had run into difficulty with Ramadan because of health issues, but was feeling very guilty about not being able to fast. But we didn't have an imam available. What I was able to do was provide resources, not to go in to advise as an imam, but be able to go in and say, well, here's the Ramadan health fact sheet. You're exempt from fasting because you're an inpatient in hospital. And we talked about what the options are, being able to give to charity instead of fasting or making up those days, and so being around, yeah, you get that's one of the privileges you get to learn a lot about how other faiths operate. For me, Ramadan's been for the past 18 years it's been my responsibility to organize Ramadan and Eid at each of our sites, not the practice of, but to make sure that everything is in place. So some of our sites have patients who are locked in their rooms after 8:30 at night. So being able to get food when in those terrible summer months when it's a 19-hour fast, and so being able to get food is making sure that that's in place, making sure that the right food is in place, making sure that support is there for anything that's needed, making sure that the food comes in at the right time for Eid, and so on. So it's a real privilege. So we do support each other. It wouldn't be unusual for the Buddhist chaplain to contact me and say, "No, I've been talking to this patient. He wants to attend the Christian service on Sunday. Is it okay? Can I give you his name to put it down for it? And I'm going back down there now, and he would like a Bible. Do you want me to drop it off for him? So you've got a Buddhist who's talking to a patient who just said, "Oh, you're one of the chaplains, aren't you? Can you get me a Bible?" And the Buddhist, which is you're never going to be doing that in if you're a Buddhist who's a monk or a priest in a temple, or so again, we don't ask each other to engage in the spiritual practices of each other's faith, but to be open to support the other chaplains, and also sometimes provide those resources and that advice for others.
I totally get that. I was actually talking to someone yesterday as well. He's a Muslim patient, and he was saying he was feeling guilty about breaking his fast early, and that he's not able to do it. And we had a similar conversation.
Mm.
Obviously, our Muslims have insight. I can give him some conversation. He wasn't able to speak to the imam because the imam is not available at the moment for a few weeks,
Mm.
and he just really appreciated that conversation. So sometimes, even if the chaplain is available, if you obviously you sound like you have a lot of information about updating that patient. But even when the chaplain's not available, sometimes a nearby person who is the similar religion, you can connect them as well, and these patients tend to appreciate it. So
Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
telling him yesterday, look, you're on medication. We spoke because I did speak to him before Ramadan, and I said, when you're on medication, it is kind of a struggle, and it's common, but do what you can, and then see how it goes. And then we're just talking about that feeling of guilt, because in every religion, there's always a circumstance where someone feels guilty about something, and
Of course.
it's great when you can have those conversations with these patients, and when they speak to you chaplains as well. I'm sure they feel great and reassured in these sort of circumstances.
Yes, that's right, and because there is some understanding that as somebody from the chaplaincy department, you can approach any of the chaplains to get information or to connect with the right resources. I've done a lot of work in hospices where people go for end of life care, and one of the things that you realize when you work in hospice is that it is a very spiritual place. People are in, you can, as you can imagine, when people are in an end of life care, they're in a reflective and an experiential place that is completely new, and it stirs a lot of things. And as when you go in as the chaplain, and sometimes people want to talk to you about life and death and regret, and sometimes people want to have prayers, or they may want to see somebody from their own faith group, or but one of the things that I recognized very quickly was that the what the nurses were doing was also spiritual care. The hospice nursing staff and the medics and everybody involved there are it has a spiritual element to it. If we think about a definition of spirituality is connectedness, to feel connected and to feel human and to feel meaning and purpose. And what I saw was nurses who would be changing somebody, and or would be going because I'd be sitting with a patient, and then they would come in to do a medical procedure, and just looking at the love and the care and the compassion that was there. So we did some training across the entire hospice, and we called it No Wrong Door. So whoever you talk to, if somebody wanted to see a chaplain, somebody had a spiritual need, the staff would recognise that they were a link person to that. They were somebody who could uh, uh, help. Sometimes they were the ones who could provide that help just by sitting with somebody, holding their hand. But very often we would find ourselves getting more referrals after this training, because the nurses were thinking of themselves as spiritual caregivers. And in the mental health setting and in the hospice setting, I think that that's particularly true. Hospitals are very business-like, aren't they? In terms of you go in for treatment, you go in for a procedure, all you're thinking about is getting better. Whereas in mental health, you're perhaps in more of a reflective space, and it's very often those treatments are as much an art as they are a science. Whereas if you're going, you've got a broken leg, they set it and you come out. That's why sometimes they talk about mental health being the Cinderella or the poor relation to physical health. But in hospice, the term literally means, as does hospital, it's from the same root term as hospitality. So when you go into hospital, when you go into hospice, you go in for hospitality. You go in for somebody to look after you. And I would say, I mean, we'd be here all day if I started talking about the stories in hospice, some of the most beautiful things that I think I've ever experienced spiritually, relationally. Because at the end of the day, if you think about, what is life? It's relationships. Whether that's a vertical relationship with God or a horizontal relationship with each other. If those things are good and right in your life, then life is good. Because if you feel a peace with God and you feel peace with those around you, that is when life is really good. That's why things, people that I had a whole other career working in the motor trade, and I worked for many years. I worked at BMW, I worked at Mercedes-Benz, I worked at Ferrari for some years, and it's perfectly possible to be a multimillionaire that is the most miserable person on the planet, because I've met several of them over the years. But then sometimes, in the most terrible circumstances in the hospice that look dreadful, you have a moment that is it's beautiful. I remember going in one day, and there was a gentleman who was very upset, and staff says, "Can you ever talk to this guy? His wife doesn't want him back home, and he's so heartbroken to think that he's now at the hospice and she doesn't want him back at the house. He's going to have to go to either into care, a nursing home, or he's going to have to stay here." And so I went to talk to him, and he was just saying, after 40 years of marriage, his wife now didn't want him, and he was just so heartbroken. And then she arrived, and she came across and she says, "What are you talking about?" She's so angry, and and I said, "Well, we're just talking, we're just talking." And so when she sat down, I stayed with them, and I could see that there was this breakdown, and so I asked her how she was doing, and she started to explain how she was struggling at home with him because he'd had two falls, and the last time he'd been on the floor for 3 hours before the ambulance could get there. And she was just talking about she's so worried about being able to look after him. It's so stressful, so difficult to be able to manage. And then I asked him how he felt about that, and he said, "Well, I didn't realise that. I thought he just didn't want me." And so this conversation is going back and forth, and I'm just asking a question in a relevant point. And it came to a moment where I asked what he would like, and he said, "I'd like to go home." And then his wife said to him, "Well, why do you want to come home? Here, look, you've got all this attention, you've got the pain relief, you've got the nursing station right there. Everything comes so quickly." She says, "Why on earth do you want to come home?" And he said, "Because you're there."
Oh, bless.
Oh, honestly, she burst into tears. He burst into tears. I burst into tears, and I just said, "I'll leave you to talk." And the next day he went home,
I think
but
you did
he
a
went home with all
fantastic job there.
he went home with
Because
all of the but he went home with all this support that he didn't have before for her to look after him. It only lasted about a week at home before the medics made the decision, "No, you need to be in hospital." But it was almost like that week sort of fixed the problem that they thought they got in their marriage, because she tried, and that he had the opportunity to go back home with the understanding that this might not be, my wife wants this to happen, but my health might not permit it. uh, I took his funeral in 2019, and 3 months ago I saw his wife at the hospice, and every time, and I see her at events, and every time I see her, she literally runs up to me and just bursts into tears. And sometimes she's like a mother. She's a real mother figure. She's a lady in her late 80s, and she'll come and she'll put her arm around me, and it's
when
so it's a real privilege to walk with people in that journey.
I was just going to say that when you do you deal with your emotions? And yeah, how do you deal with your emotions? And do you feel connected to them? And like whenever I speak to you, you always tell me something inspiring and some inspiring story. And I always think this is fantastic, that you're able to deal with them in this way. And then when you have any conversation with you, you always have something inspiring to say. So it's always a pleasure to hear everything that you have to say. And even
Well, it's.
one
I think.
occasion,
Sorry, go on.
one occasion you even mentioned that you were going to the shops and someone had asked you for money or for
Oh
food.
yes, that's right. That was.
That I think that was the first time I heard from you, and I was just laughing.
Yes, that was yeah. In the Bible, there's a story about a man. You've heard of the Samaritans, the charity that talks to people. Well, that's from a story that they're taken from a story in the Bible about a Samaritan who was. They were supposed to be the most. They weren't good people in the eyes of many others, and so this somebody had been attacked on the road and was left to die on the road, and a religious person went past, and then another religious person went past, and they ignored them, and then a Samaritan came along who was supposed to be the baddies and helped them. And Jesus asked the question to the crowd, which one was the good person out of all of those? And they had to say, well, the Samaritan was. And I'd spoken at a church about that and about being a light in the world on a Sunday morning. And then in the afternoon, stopped at a shop in Nottingham, and there was a guy begging outside, and I rushed in to get something and rushed back out. And as I got in the car, I thought, oh, I feel bad, just and then it suddenly dawned on me, and there's me speaking this morning at a church about being the good Samaritan and being somebody who brings light into the world. And so I went back out and gave him some money, and he looked at me and he immediately started to pray for me, the man sitting on the street. And then he said, and I said to him, oh, I says, thank you for that. I'm a chaplain. And he said, oh, I know, I've seen you in prison before. And I thought, if I had just walked past, I would have been like those religious people in the story that just walked on. And I felt so relieved that I'd actually, we should always take the opportunity to do some good if you can. And that's what I've always done with my children when we were out and we see people begging. That sometimes people say, well, don't. They'll only spend it on drugs, and I always give my children money. I used to, and say, no, give something. If you see somebody who's got a need, give something. It's if they do something else with it, then that's up to them. But at least you've tried to help. So it's if we all did that in the world. I'm not saying that I always do that perfectly, because I don't. Sometimes I am the person that walks past on the other side. But what I love about being a chaplain is the opportunity to be alongside people, and some of those are the long game in the high secure setting. There are guys who I've been talking to weekly for 20 years. I also go into prisons, I go into young offenders institutes and to different sites, and to make that journey with them, because you can judge somebody. I heard somebody say this once, and what an amazing thing. We judge other people according to what they did, and ourselves according to what we intend to do, which I think is
That's a very deep.
it is. We judge other people according to what they did, and not saying what they've done, but what they did. We look at somebody, 10 years ago they did this, they're clearly, but because sometimes the people that I work with in that setting, of that high secure setting, it's people that have committed the most serious crimes imaginable. But if you can suspend judgment, because they've already been judged by the courts, judged by
I was just going to
society.
say, Kevin, we are coming to the end of the show.
Yes, yeah,
I
yeah.
did want to expand on your point that you should not judge when you work, especially if you're working with offenders.
Very
Don't
good.
judge because they already do feel judged, don't you think?
That's the key thing. If you can do that, you could be a chaplain.
So yeah, Kevin is here. If you want to get hired, do reach out to him. He'll be back in a few weeks to talk more about chaplaincy. And thank you so much for listening. And thank you, Kevin, for coming on as well.
Thank you.